Some friends and I recently played through the game Detroit Become Human together. Since there were 3 characters and 3 of us, we decided to each choose one to play as throughout the game and switch off the controller. It got a little bit awkward when Connor and Marcus decided to wrestle each other, but luckily, I didn't have to deal with that because I chose to play as Kara. For those of you who don't know, Kara is an android that is purchased by a poor, single father living in the slums of Detroit. Upon being purchased, I do everything that robotic maids are designed to do, such as cook, clean, murder the man at the house, and steal his daughter to raise as my own. Playing as Kara, I got to experience what it's like to be a mother, and learned that murdering multiple people in front of your 10-ish-year-old child has no lasting psychological impact or is even brought up in conversation after the fact. Throughout our 12-hour playthrough, as I bonded more and more with my adopted daughter Alice, I learned the most important lesson of them all, that David Cage sucks at writing plot twists. This is going to be your official spoiler warning for Detroit Become Human, and also for The Meg, because I just saw that in theaters the other day. Ready? There's a second, bigger shark. But back to the topic at hand. The wet cheese stick of a plot twist in Kara's story arc is that Alice is actually an android, and just decided not to tell me until 3/4 of the way through the game. Now, the actually an android plot twist is something that has been used before in media to decent effect, but in this scenario, the fact that she decided to keep the fact that she's an android secret makes no sense whatsoever. The reason that Alice provides in-game is that she's afraid that I wouldn't love her if I knew she was an android. But why did you think that, Alice? You know that I'm an android too, right? What on earth led you to believe that knowing that you're an android would make me love you less? I mean, your father was human, and it wasn't like I was all like, oh gee, his life means so much more because he's human. No, I just killed him. In fact, everyone I've killed this playthrough has been human, Alice. And Luther, the man we stumbled upon on our journey, who ended up joining the whole family dynamic we had going on, guess what he was? An android. It's not like there's any moment where I was like, well, Luther, it would be a bit easier to think of you as family if you were human. In fact, almost every group that we ran into that helped us along the way said something to the lines of, I can't believe that you're helping this girl, despite her being human. At no point in time did you stop and go, yeah, Kara probably wouldn't care if I'm an android. If anything, it would have just made things a heck of a lot easier because I wouldn't have had to worry about finding you food or finding warm places to sleep. Not to mention, there are a good few things in the story that don't really make sense if Alice is an android. Like, she was a popular enough model that she was featured on the cover of a magazine, but despite this, no one except Luther recognizes that she is an android. Considering that throughout the story, we run into people who disassemble androids for a living, people who ran an android underground railroad, and members of Jericho, the android revolution, I find it kind of hard to believe that when the first thing I say to every new person I meet is, hi, I'm Kara, and this is my human daughter Alice, that not a single person along the line went, now wait just a patty-flipping minute. I know that when the reveal happens, it's supposed to be this moment of, oh, that makes so much sense now. That's why Alice turned down food every time I offered it to her. But it just raised so many more questions. Like, when I served you and your dad spaghetti in the beginning of the game, what was your game plan then? I mean, you sat down at the table, and your father didn't have a problem with me sitting a plate in front of you. Your father did know that you're an android, right? I mean, I killed him before he could go and tell his whole backstory and all, but there is no way that he couldn't have known unless he just never noticed that you never ate food in front of him for however many years you've been living together. Maybe he just flips the dining room table at literally every meal you eat, and that's how you keep up the ruse. Also, your father sends you to school. Why do you need to send an android to school? What's the point of that? And assuming that you're keeping it secret from everyone that you're an android, how do the other students not notice you not eating? Not only does this plot twist not really make sense from a logical standpoint, it's downright awful from a narrative perspective. One thing that Detroit Become Human did really well was to show us androids' relations and opinions towards humans through different lenses. With Marcus, you see humanity through the lens of being political rivals. Excluding Carl, your only real interaction with humans is through protest and statements. Hence why it is incredibly easy for you to fall down the path of violence and destruction. With Connor, we get to see the relation between humans and androids through the lens of being co-workers and even friends. Because of this more personal relationship, we get to see Connor and Hank be much more forgiving and understanding of each other's differences and downfalls. And the most impactful lens of them all should have been that of family, where despite their differences, Kara and Alice are almost inseparable, and it's nearly impossible to play Kara in such a way that leads Alice to resent you. It's supposed to show you how close androids and humans could become, and show that android families could be just as close-knit as human families. But David Cage tossed that all out the window to be like, ooh, look, a plot twist, it's so cool, it's just like Blade Runner. The only other reason that I can think of to include this plot twist in the game is that it's not for the characters, but for the players. Maybe it's supposed to ask, can you still think of Alice in the same way once you know that she's an android? And like, Cage, if you make something that looks, acts, and sounds human, people will project humanity onto it pretty much indiscriminately. Nobody cares if you tell them that the characters are actually robots. I've seen people grow attached to squid in Minecraft, for Christ's sake. And now, I don't want to harp on this point too much, but keep in mind that whether you like it or not, Cage, people consider your game to be a civil rights allegory. So let's apply that logic to this scenario, shall we? A slave is purchased to work on a plantation where she is threatened and beaten by the owner. The slave ends up killing the plantation owner in order to save his daughter and flee with her up north. Towards the end of their adventure, it is revealed that the daughter, who we had previously thought was white, was actually born out of wedlock to a black mother, and the girl had just been light-skinned enough to pass up until this point. And then after all of this is revealed, the girl says to the previous slave, "I thought you wouldn't love me if you knew that I was black." Doesn't really logically follow, does it? I think one of the biggest reasons that this plot twist flopped so hard for me is that when you think about it, nothing in the story really changed upon us finding out this information. Our plan stays the same, our outlook stays the same, our status in society stays the same. The problem is that David Cage was so desperate to make sure that we project humanity onto the androids that there is no actual ideological difference between humans and androids in this world. So when we find out a character is actually an android and not a human, our response is along the lines of, so what? From a moral standpoint, nothing has changed. In fact, can you even call it a plot twist if it doesn't affect the plot whatsoever? It's the equivalence of Obi-Wan sitting down with Luke and being like, I know Vader told you he was your father, but there's something I need to tell you. He's actually your stepfather. Sure, it's new information and the truth about the character's relation to Luke, but it's also just kind of boring and hardly impactful in any way. So in conclusion, when you let the cage out of the cage, I don't know how to end this video. Bye.